You are a young mother in Constantinople in 1453. For centuries, your city has stood as the jewel of Christendom, its massive walls protecting it from countless sieges. But now, those same walls are crumbling beneath the relentless pounding of Ottoman cannons. For more than 1,000 years, they had seemed indestructible, but everything you once trusted is collapsing before your eyes. 3 days ago, your husband died defending the ramparts. He fought bravely, but bravery could not stop the tide that was coming. Now, as Ottoman soldiers crash through your door, you clutch your infant daughter to your chest. You know what is about to happen. And deep inside, you realize that your husband's death may have been a blessing compared to the horrors you are about to endure. The fall of Constantinople on May 29th, 1453, marked not only the end of the Byzantine Empire, but also the beginning of a new chapter for the Ottoman Empire. Over the next 6 centuries, the Ottomans expanded their dominion across 3 continents. From the gates of Vienna in Europe to the deserts of Arabia and the mountains of North Africa, their reach seemed unstoppable. Today, the empire is often remembered for its architectural marvels such as the Blue Mosque, for the brilliance of its military organization, and for sultans who left their mark on the course of history. But there is another side to Ottoman expansion, one that history has often chosen to leave buried in archives. It is a story of systematic exploitation, a method of conquest that weaponized the most intimate aspects of human life. When Ottoman armies broke through enemy defenses, what followed was not simply plunder, chaos, and retreat. Instead, there was a highly organized process, outlined in military manuals and carried out with bureaucratic precision. This process was known as the harvesting protocol. It was designed not merely to win battles, but to reshape conquered populations in ways that would serve the empire for generations. Contemporary Byzantine chroniclers described scenes of horror that seemed beyond imagination, while Ottoman records documented the same events in dry administrative detail. Men were executed in groups, not in the heat of battle, but after surrender, carefully organized and recorded. Boys as young as 6 were sometimes killed if they showed signs of resistance. The reasoning was simple. Survivors could grow into future threats. Women and young girls, however, were subjected to a different fate altogether. Ottoman law contained codified procedures for what they termed population processing. Women were sorted publicly in town squares, often against the backdrop of burning churches and destroyed civic buildings. This public setting was intentional. It was designed to maximize psychological devastation, ensuring that the memory of submission would linger long after the army had moved on. Young women between 14 and 25 were considered the most valuable. Records from the fall of Constantinople list more than 4,000 in this category, each assigned a number and an estimated market value. Women between 25 and 40 were often forced into labor, while those older than 40 were frequently executed, considered unworthy of the cost of feeding and transporting them. Children faced destinies just as grim. Boys under 6 were absorbed into programs of forced conversion and cultural assimilation. Girls were placed into so-called formation programs, designed to prepare them for service within the imperial system. These measures were not spontaneous acts of cruelty. They were deliberate policy. Families were separated by design. Mothers were forced to watch their children torn away, not because it was necessary, but because it broke the spirit of resistance more effectively than any weapon. Infants were sometimes killed before their mother's eyes, not out of hatred for the child, but to demonstrate absolute control. The Ottomans understood the psychological effect of this terror. It spread like wildfire, ensuring that the next city might surrender without a fight. Within 48 hours of Constantinople's fall, approximately 50,000 people had been processed through this system. 12,000 women and girls were shipped to markets in Bursa, Ankara, and other Ottoman cities. Another 8,000 were distributed among soldiers as personal property. Surviving records show ship manifests that listed women alongside silk, spices, and precious metals. A typical entry might read, 20 bolts of Damascus silk, 40 bags of pepper, 15 females aged 16 to 20, excellent condition. Human lives reduced to commodities, cataloged with the same care as livestock. The Ottomans did not invent slavery, but they transformed it into an organized industry. Capture, transport, sale, and even breeding of human beings became part of a standardized system. The empire's economy, administration, and military incentives were intertwined with this exploit. Commanders were rewarded not only for land conquered, but for the number and quality of captives they brought back. Success was measured in both territory and human lives. The psychological impact of this system was profound. Villages and cities that knew what had happened to Constantinople often surrendered at the mere approach of Ottoman armies. The threat of systematic brutality was more powerful than cannons or cavalry charges. Fear itself became a weapon of conquest. For women who survived, the ordeal was far from over. Many were forced into marriages legitimized by Ottoman law, where rape was transformed into legal union. Widows of fallen soldiers automatically became property of the conqueror who killed their husband. This was not a custom. It was written into law, complete with procedures for claiming ownership. Conquered women had their names changed, their religions forcibly abandoned, and their identities systematically erased. Conversion centers in major Ottoman cities processed thousands of women. These were facilities designed not for mercy, but for control. Archaeological remains reveal specialized chambers, drainage systems, and holding cells. Women were forced to denounce their previous faiths in public, often by desecrating the symbols of their religion. The process was calculated to humiliate and to destroy any hope of return. Many women were deliberately impregnated during these programs, ensuring that their children would bind them permanently to their new lives and eliminate thoughts of escape. The children born of such unions faced destinies determined from birth. Boys who showed promise were absorbed into the Ottoman administration or military. Girls were often funneled back into the cycle of servitude and exploit. Mothers and children were separated as a matter of policy. Administrators understood that despair weakened resistance, and so they deliberately used psychological manipulation alongside physical control. The scale of the Ottoman system is revealed in their own records. They maintained breeding registers that tracked the reproductive capacities of enslaved women. Buildings designed for controlled breeding were constructed across the empire with identical layouts optimized for surveillance and efficiency. Physicians employed by the empire monitored pregnancies and births, treating women not as human beings but as investments to be managed. Older women who could no longer bear children were often reassigned to harsh labor or left to die. Younger women were sorted and cared for only insofar as they could continue producing children for the empire. The records that survive read like engineering documents. treating human suffering as technical problems to be solved. Communities living near Ottoman borders adapted to this constant threat. Parents scarred their daughters to make them less desirable. Some families broke their children's limbs in acts of desperate protection. Villages dug hiding places underground or in forests, hoping to preserve even a few from capture. But Ottoman forces anticipated these measures, torturing survivors to reveal hiding spots, turning hope into despair. The memory of these practices reshaped entire cultures. Traditions arose centered on the protection of women, stories and customs born from centuries of fear. The trauma lingered long after Ottoman military power declined, passed down in folk memory and local histories. The most chilling part is that the Ottomans did not attempt to hide these practices. They recorded them. They cataloged them with the same precision used for taxation, architecture, or military planning. Their archives preserve evidence of a system that transformed human lives into commodities, reducing mothers, daughters, and children to numbers in a ledger. When we remember the Ottoman Empire, it is tempting to focus only on the grand mosques, the brilliant military campaigns, and the sultans who altered history. But there is another legacy, written in the lives of millions who endured systematic exploitation. It is a reminder that empires are not built only with stone and steel, but also upon the suffering of those who were silenced. The story of Ottoman conquest is not just about the fall of cities or the rise of dynasties. It is about what happened to ordinary people when the walls fell. It is about families torn apart, identities erased, and human beings reduced to property. And it is a warning of how quickly the unthinkable can become policy when power goes unchecked. The archives remain. The evidence is there. All that is required is the willingness to confront it.